I mean, those have been two great talks, and I'm going to take a bit of a broader look at the concept of automation and the way the left is responding to it. I mean, I think we already know enough now. There's been so much discussion in the media of the threat of automation, and I think we already know actually that a lot of the problems of the way the world is already in 2017 has been caused by previous waves of automation over the last 30 years of neoliberalism and information technology. I think we already know that it's part of the reason of the massive polarisation in income that we've seen under neoliberalism and the increased inequality and the hollowing out of the middle of the job market. I think that's kind of well established. I mean, in fact, I remember saying back in 2013 that one of the possible impacts of that hollowing out of the middle of the job market is a tendency towards extreme right-wing politics, because, of course, those people are basically lower middle class people whose jobs have disappeared, and those people, historically, are always the people who tend to support fascism, and that, so I could see that coming even before the Brexit vote and the election of Donald Trump. I think this kind of way that information technology fits with hand in glove with neoliberalism. I mean, automation is just one example of the way that works. I think the information technology and neoliberalism are basically a perfect fit. I sat down the other day and wrote a list of about 10 ways in which that works, and if you want me to talk about it afterwards, ask me a question about that. But I think information technology is the reason why this particular form of capitalism has basically swept everything before it, for the last 35, 40 years, really. It's the power of the coming together of those two things. So I'm not going to talk too much about about what automation is going to do. As I said, I think there's a lot that's already been written about that, but I'm going to focus on the question of why is it that parts of the left have suddenly decided to embrace this idea of full automation. We know that automation has always been the key tool of the way capitalism tries to first de-skill workers, control them, reduce their bargaining power, and ultimately, reduce dependency upon them, and ending up with basically terminating their employment. That's something that every politically aware factory worker in the 20th century knew. That was what automation was for. And so, we've seen a couple of these. I brought them with me. These two books in particular. Paul Mason's book called Post-Capitalism and Nick Sniczek, Alex Williams' book called Inventing the Future. They've become bestsellers, and large sections of the left seem to think that it's a great idea. And because I decided to take a look at, basically it looks like Turkey's voting for Christmas, basically, and what's going on in their heads that they could think of that. So basically, I think what it comes down to is that this kind of thinking is a symptom of the political defeat of the left. The left has always had two main elements to it: the socialist demand for social equality and for the struggle for the control over the means of production, and sort of progressive, general social progressivism, and in particular the idea that of progress through technology, which is one of the key ideologies of capitalism. And I think what we saw in about 1990 was a deal came together basically between the sort of we'll call them reformist moderate elements in the in the right wing of left Labour parties and the neoliberal but socially progressive elements in conservative parties that form this alliance in the centre of which is so basically pro-neoliberal but socially progressive. And then what happened there was basically the left gave up on that whole element of its basic constitution of fighting for control of the means of production and settled for progress, basically settled for what's called progress, social progress, progress through technology. And if you, I mean, I just, I think you probably all know the examples of the politicians that represent that, that political tendency that has been the basic ruling political tendency in our society for the last nearly 30 years. So with the Clintons and Tony Blair, Barack Obama, and even actually you could say David Cameron, who was a neoliberal but socially progressive person. Brought in gay marriage, for example. So I think that's what's happened to the left. And, I'm going to say a few things that criticise Marxism, but I'm sort of still enough of a Marxist to insist that actually that struggle over control over the means of production is the fundamental struggle in society, actually. Because the production of goods and services is the production of necessities of life for all of us. And if you control that, you have the world at your mercy. And that's why socialism has always focused on that thing. And what's made it the socialist vision so compelling is that there were always a holistic view of the whole of society based on that fundamental grounding. And so, the left has basically had to forget all about that, and it's had to forget about the basic deal under industrial capitalism, which is where the left came from. And so, basically, I'm going to remind you, the basic deal is this. Before industrial capitalism, the large majority of people living in rural, agricultural-based societies, they, at least an awful lot of them, basically were able to subsist through the work, the paid work that they did, plus the by getting some of their subsistence from the commons. They could graze a cow on the commons. They could, or a pig. They could gather firewood. Etc. They had their own little plots of land. So what the basic deal with industrial capitalism, and which was basically forced through with it, extreme violence, the deal was this: that the bourgeoisie took over the means of production and said, the deal for all those people who've been forced off the land is, you get to work in factories, you have to work in the factories 14 hours a day, but what you get for that is eventually, maybe after about 2 or 3 generations of that process, you get cheap industrial goods. Basically, you get to survive through your wage labour, and you get cheap industrial goods. And the other bit of the deal was, since we the bourgeoisie still depend upon you the working class for producing stuff, we will share political power with you. And so you've got the trend of the gradually widening of the vote. When then after about 150 years they got round to women. Anyway, that's the basic deal under industrial capitalism. But all through those 200 years, what's been happening is a slow, gradual, drip process of basically getting rid of workers and getting rid of the dependency on workers, on the labour of the working class, and so thereby undermining the fundamental basis of that deal. And we're now at the point, information technology is the best technology that's ever been invented for that constant process of eliminating labour and intensifying the amount of capital in production, and that's what it was for from the beginning. The computer, Charles Babbage, as you will all know, was the inventor of the computer, and he was also a political economist who, was a great advocate of mechanisation and the factory system. And his difference engine with the first computer was, he was openly said that this is basically what this was for. What this is for managing the mechanised and eventually automated factory. So that's what computers were from the very beginning, and that's kind of always, what they've been for. And so I guess you can see where I'm going with all this. That the idea of full automation, that we should embrace full automation, basically leaves the control of the means of production entirely in the hands of corporate capital. And it means that we then become totally dependent upon corporate capital for the basic means of existence. We've been excluded from the commons. We can't live in any other way. So we're basically totally dependent upon them, and therefore at their mercy. And I kind of think it's rather naive to think that they'll give us universal basic income just because we're human beings. I mean, I don't think that's what capitalism will be about. I think, Nick, one of the good things in this book is that they talk about the existence already across large swathes of the world of what they call surplus populations. Basically, people who don't really basically have the means of subsistence. And I think that's basically where it's likely that we're all heading. That we will become what the Nazis politely called useless eaters. So I think it's the strategy of saying, let's go for full automation is just and universal basic income as the demands on that. You want me to stop? Okay.
I'm saying 2 minutes. So
okay, I will. Okay, there's a chunk here I will cut out. Then I was going to go into a bit more. I knew this was going to be too long. I'm sorry. I can, if you want to ask me more about the kind of thinking on the left that could, lead people like intelligent people like Paul Mason to embrace the idea of full automation. Ask me about that. But I think. I think one thing I'll also say very quickly that it, particularly in this book, it comes with a kind of very kind of simplistic anti-work, left-wing anti-work politics, which basically throws the baby out with the bathwater. The only experience that most people have of work, of course, for a long time is alienated capitalist work, and so people react to that by saying, "Oh, let's get rid of work. We don't want to work. Why? I'll stay in bed. Thank you very much." And I think there's just a bit, it's kind of weird that people forget that actually the basic human condition is that you do have to work to live, and that there are lots of good things about work, including the dignity of providing for yourself and providing for your family. I find the anti-work ideology in there just a bit ridiculous, really. So this is where we get to the Lucas plan, because there are other tendencies in socialism, where is it? Here's one that not I, but a bunch of people produced earlier. It's the Lucas Aerospace Combined Shop Stewards Committee Alternative Corporate Plan for Lucas Aerospace. I think I'll very, very briefly, for those who don't know about the Lucas plan, describe what it is. Basically, in the mid-1970s, workers at Lucas Aerospace Arms Company were threatened by redundancy. They come up with a workers' plan for how to use their skills and technology to convert the company to what they called socially useful production. That was the key phrase. And on the basis of and they produced about 150 ideas of how they different things they could do with their technology. And crucially, a crucial part of that was a socialist philosophy of technology, that they talked about human skills-centered technology as the polar opposite of automation technology, which basically what it does is to take the knowledge that's embodied, that is there in human skills, and put it into machines, and thereby de-skill labour and eventually eliminate it. So they developed a socialist philosophy of technology, which was basically an anti-automation philosophy. It's rather funny that Nick Snichek and Alex Williams say lots of nice things about the Lucas Plan, but what they conveniently forget is that the Lucas Plan were vehemently against automation. In fact, one of the key criteria in the plan, they actually use the phrase that they want any socially useful production should be labour intensive in order to avoid structural unemployment. So basically I think, hold on a minute, see what I can cut out here. So the other crucial thing, of course, to say in this, and it's quite extraordinary that these writers have basically nothing to say about it, is the environment. It's the environment, stupid. We live in a world in which the industrial capitalism that has produced after 200 years this environmental crisis, and basically there are no. How can you be talking about the dream of what they call fully automated luxury communism? Beats me, when what we actually need to do is radical degrowth, reduce consumption, and we need to concentrate on meeting people's basic needs and creating a reasonably equal society through what the Lucas workers called socially useful production. The idea of full automation is just a continuation of the industrial philosophy. I will stop in very, very quickly. I'm sorry. So I think basically the Lucas workers had it right, that what we need is to focus on socially useful production using the technology that puts human skills at the centre of work, in order precisely to reduce the dependency on technology that industrial capitalism has given us, and to increase our resilience in the face of the shocks that are going to come. I think basically we have to. I regard this demand for fully automated luxury communism is a basic capitulation to information technology neoliberalism. I think basically there is no alternative but for the left to renew the struggle for the control of the means of production. And the concrete bit of that is, I think we need a campaign against automation. And that's something that Breaking the Frame is thinking about at the moment. Be really interested in your thoughts on that. And I think it's a campaign that could be incredibly popular and powerful, and catch the public imagination in the way that the GM food campaign, which been one of the key experiences of my political life, that campaign basically blew away the myth that you can't stop technology. Because what that campaign did was it basically stopped one of the a major capitalist industry fairly dead in its tracks for a considerable period. We're still not eating much GM food in this country, and that's the link to the final thing, which is that Breaking the Frame's next event is a celebration of the 20th anniversary of the GM food campaign, and there's flyers for it on the back there. So, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
Right. So, any questions for Dave before we open up for discussion?